Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsStamp.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. In this video, I'm creating with the Simon Says Stamp Fluttering Butterflies layering stencil to create a birthday card for a sister. I don't have a sister, I'm the only child. I do have a bunch of cousins, but my friend has a sister and I was making this card with her in mind. I have already given her the card so that she can give it to her sister on her birthday. All supplies I'm using in this video are listed and linked in the video description below. So let's take a look at this new stencil. This is a set of 3 stencils, each covering a part of the butterfly. And you have 3 different butterflies here, along with some scattered dots that you can add to your butterflies. The stencils are etched, and get this, they tell you which color of ink to use for each layer. So you have a light layer, and I hope you can see the etching on video. You can see it real well in real life, but I'm not sure if the camera is picking it up. There's also a medium layer, and it's again etched, and a dark layer. How cool is that? I love that the product makes it easy for me as a card maker to use it. You know, I don't have to do the guesswork. I can read the etching on the stencil and boom, I know what shade of ink to use. Now, of course, I don't have to follow this. I can do whatever I want, and so can you. But having this information etched on the stencil itself is just invaluable. Now, these stencils are also very easy to align. As you can see, you can use the corner of the stencil to help you align each consecutive layer. So if you are ink blending on a large sheet of cardstock, mark the corner of your first layer and you will know where to place the corner of the second and the third layers. Or if you're using like a stencil mat, use the corners to your advantage. Now, I'm not one to stick with the rules, so I didn't use the alignment trick. I just eyeballed the placement and it worked fine for the most part. I did misalign one layer on one of my butterflies. I misaligned it just a tiny bit, but it turned out fine in the end. I think the butterfly looked great. So let's get started. I'm placing my stencil onto a panel of cardstock. This is Simon Says Stamp 130-pound cardstock. I'm using Simon Says Stamp very, very low tack tape. That's exactly the name of this product. Very, very low tack tape. And it is exactly that, very low tack tape that will not damage your paper, but will hold your stencil or whatever else it is you need it to hold. It will hold it in place. I have already planned ink colors for each of my butterflies, and I will do 3 butterflies here and of course 3 colors of ink. And I pre-planned a color for each layer. So I'm starting with cantaloupe color for this particular butterfly. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks and ink blending with the Simon Says Stamp blending brushes. I'm using brushes in different sizes depending on the size of the section that I need to blend, and also depending if I have a brush for that particular color or not. I like using the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks because they do not stain my, whatever it is that I'm using. They do not stain stamps. They do not stain stencils. I can easily wipe my stencil clean and not worry about having the ink residue or like the weird color on the stencil after using the type of ink that does stain. Now, I do directional blending, meaning I try to have heavier color on one side of the image and lighter color or lighter concentration of color on the other side of the image. So there is some gradient happening. You don't want to just slap a solid, like super solid layer of color without any color variation. I think that would look too flat. So directional ink blending is an easy way to go here. Next, I'm using color Peachy for the second layer, and then the third layer of this butterfly is blended with the color Grapefruit. And our first butterfly is done. So simple and so easy. I can blend a bunch of these in no time if I wanted, to maybe mass produce cards with butterflies. I'm going to go with blue and green colors for my second butterfly. I have my stencil aligned and taped in place. Now I want to make sure that the second butterfly is close enough to the first butterfly, the one that I just ink blended, but I also want to make sure that the wings are not overlapping. I do not want to have any overlap here because having blue ink over that peachy ink, I just don't want it. I want to keep my inks true color inks. I don't want any mixes. So I'm making sure that the second butterfly is not touching the first one. And again, I'm doing my directional blending thing. I'm using a smaller brush here, and this gives me more control over how I apply the ink and how I shade the wings. Next, I'm using Tide Pool, and this again is blended using a smaller brush, and I love it. Now, these two colors are very similar. You probably can't really tell them apart, but there is a slight color variation. And the last color that I have for this butterfly is Lime Licious, so blues and green, and I love this color combination. Having finished this butterfly, I did regret positioning the first butterfly so far from the panel edge. This affected the placement for my second butterfly. It does look a bit out of place, a bit odd, but it did work out in the end. It looked okay on the finished card. I'm ink blending the third butterfly with yellow first. This is citrine color, and I'm also adding a touch of orange to have an even more color variation. So orange that I'm using here is Sherbet, and I'm coming in with this small round detail brush from Simon to make sure that I don't over apply this ink. It is important to have good ink blending tools, whichever tools you prefer to use. I like these brushes because they come in various sizes and shapes, and they also are color coded. So that makes it easier to grab the right brush for the right color. As you can see, my brushes are not labeled. I don't have a designated brush for a specific color. I can use one brush for several shades of the same color. For example, I will just use one yellow brush for like 3 different shades of yellow. I will try to clean it in between the different colors, but I don't have 3 yellow brushes for the 3 shades of yellow. Next, I'm using Guava, and it's such a pretty pink color, and I am blending this over the second and also the third layers of this butterfly. Now, the third layer overlaps the first layer, so naturally, when I blend this pink over the yellow, I'm getting an orange color, and that works really well with that slight orange ink blending that I have happening on the body of the butterfly. Next, I'm ink blending the scattered dots, and they help fill the background and balance my design, because before I just had 3 elements. I had them positioned heavily on the top and left hand side of my panel, and then the bottom and right hand side of my panel was looking kind of lonely. So by adding these dots, I'm creating balance. I'm using cantaloupe color for this. You don't want to use something that's too vibrant. It's best to use a soft and subtle color, and our background is done. Now, my panel was originally cut to 4¼ by 5½ inches, but I used a rectangle die to trim it down and turn it into a smaller panel, and you can see that it is under 4 by 5 inches now. I have a beautiful sentiment that I want to stamp overlapping the butterflies, and the sentiment comes from the Sisters Forever stamp set from Kathy Zilski. I'm stamping it using my Mini Misty stamping tool and the Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. Now, the reason I'm using this ink, because typically I like to use VersaFine Onyx Black, but VersaFine is a pigment ink, and it might smear on this particular paper because this paper has special coating, and that coating prevents VersaFine from drying quickly. So I either need to be super careful and make sure I don't smear anything. I can also heat set it using my heat tool, or heat emboss it in clear embossing powder to make sure the ink will not smear, or I can just use a different kind of ink, which is exactly what I did. And the Simon Says Stamp ink Intense Black worked really well. It's a fabulous black ink, and it dries almost instantly. I then used a layer of fun foam. I just cut a panel to be slightly smaller than my ink blended base, or my ink blended panel. And I use that fun foam layer to foam mount my ink blended panel onto my card base. So I have a solid layer of dimension happening here. So my panel is popped up. I also have a tiny happy birthday sentiment off to the side. I wanted to make this into a birthday card. So not just a card for a sister, but a card for a sister you'd give on her birthday. So I created this additional sentiment by first ink blending cheeky ink onto the same type of paper, the Simon Says Stamp 130-pound paper. And I then stamped the sentiment. This one comes from an older stamp set from Simon called Tiny Birthday. I used Simon's T-square ruler to adhere this sentiment straight onto my card. Now, believe it or not, I never had a T-square ruler before. I don't know why I was so stupid. This thing makes card making so much easier. I mean, it's such a simple tool, yet the things it helps me with, it's just super valuable. So don't be like me. If you still don't have a T-square ruler, get one. You will thank me later. Okay, lastly, I embellished my card using the Simon Says Stamp rose gold confetti. I scattered them around the card. I basically kind of tried and follow the ink blended scattered dots. So I have a couple of sequins or confetti pieces in the bottom right corner, and then I have them going up to the top left corner. I particularly love these sequins because I keep saying sequins. I should say confetti. I particularly love these confetti because they don't have a hole in the middle like sequins do. So these confetti are definitely a win for me. So here's a look at the card I have for you today. Thanks so much for spending time with me. I hope you enjoyed this idea. If you make a card inspired by this video, as always, we would love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always love seeing what you guys are making. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you, and I'll see you next time.